What's going on? In this video, I'm going to take you through the best video settings for the Canon R8. And so I'm just going to jump right into the menu of this camera, go through each of the settings and help you dial them in to get the best possible video out of this camera. Now, like always, I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to jump right into this video, but if it does help you out, please consider dropping a like and subscribing to my channel. All right, now let's get into it. My beginner's guide for the best video settings for the Canon R8. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into the menu, and then we're of course going to start on page 1 of the shooting menu. And so I'm going to go ahead and set all these settings how I would personally shoot video, and most of these are going to be for the highest quality video, but some of these are a little bit more personal preference, which I will mention, and I'll mention the different options that I would choose from, if it's not something that I would just set to one thing and leave it. And so first of all, we of course have movie recording size, so this is going to be the resolution and frame rate that you record in. And for this, there are 3 different resolution frame rate combinations that I would recommend. First of all, most of the time I record in 4K 59.94, or in other words, 60 frames per second. However, there's actually 2 options for every single different combination. As you can see right here, there's 4K 60 standard, and then there's 4K 60 light. And you can also see right here the total record time for each mode. This is going to be how long you're going to record on the current SD card that you have in your camera. And so even if I switch between these 2, which are the same resolution and frame rate, you can see I get actually double the record time in the light mode versus the standard option. And so these light modes essentially record less data on the SD card, so you can get a lot more footage on it. Now it does slightly reduce the quality and the amount of data in your video, but I personally have never seen a difference between these 2, and I always record in the light mode just so I can get double the amount of video on my SD card. You know, especially if you do record at 4K 60 frames per second, these are pretty big files, and so I would probably recommend just shooting in light. And the only time I wouldn't shoot in light is if you're going to record in 1080p. I would just go in standard to get the highest quality you can out of it. But really in 4K, you're never going to notice any difference between the standard and light. And so like I said, I usually shoot 4K 60 frames per second. That's going to be really high resolution, really sharp video. And then also that 60 frames per second is going to give you really smooth looking videos, smooth realistic motion. And it'll also allow you to slow down and get some slow motion video if you need to. And so I would say probably 80% of the time I record 4K 60 FPS, but the other 2 options I would recommend are 4K 29.97, in other words 4K 30, as well as 4K 24 frames per second, or like it says 23.98. And so kind of my rule of thumb, if I'm recording on a tripod, regular speed motion, like most of my, talking head videos where I just have my camera looking at me in a studio, I'll record 4K 24 frames per second. That's kind of the standard for just regular motion. Especially if you're not moving the camera around a lot, it won't look very choppy, it'll just be normal video. However, if you are moving the camera around a lot and doing lots of pan side to side and movements and handheld footage, you might want to switch up to 4K 30, which is going to be a little smoother, or 4K 60 like I said, which is going to be the smoothest, best quality video, but it'll also eat up the most storage space and have the biggest file sizes. And so I'm going to go ahead and select 4K 60 Lite, which is this mode right here. And now in the next option, if you want to record specific dedicated slow motion footage and get as slow motion as you can, there is a high frame rate mode, which I can go ahead and enable right here. And once you have that enabled, go back up, and there's 2 different options you can choose from: 180 frames per second and 120, of course in the standard and light options. And so for this, if you want to record dedicated slow motion video, which this camera is actually pretty good at, I would record 1080p, 180 frames per second in light. And so that's going to be this option right here. And so 180 frames is definitely going to be noticeably slower than 120 frames per second. And so, if you really just want to get the maximum out of this camera, the slowest motion, it's going to be the same quality as 120 frames per second, but you're going to get 60 extra frames per second with 180p. However, keep in mind this doesn't record any audio when you record this mode, and it automatically slows the footage down. So as soon as you're done recording and you go to look at it, whether it's on your camera or computer, it's already going to be slowed down to the maximum level. And like I said, there's no audio while recording high-speed video like this. So I would only turn this on and use this mode if you know 100% you're going to be using that as slow motion footage with no audio. Otherwise, the 4K 60 you can still turn into slow motion and get not as slow, of course, as 180 frames per second, but you can still get pretty slow motion with 4K 60. All right, next up, movie cropping. Real quick, I just released my brand new Lightroom preset pack that you can pick up right now for only $5. It comes with 5 presets that I custom made to work with any style of photo you want to take, and of course they're going to work with any photo from any camera and any lens. So with literally one click, these are going to completely transform your photos and save you a ton of time photo editing. And like I said, they're only $5, so go check those out down in the description. Now let's get back to the video. This is actually a really awesome feature, so if you use that disabled, which I do 99% of the time, I would usually keep that disabled to use the entire sensor and get the best quality out of this video. However, if you go ahead and enable this, it's actually going to crop in on your footage, and essentially this will be the same field of view as a crop sensor camera like the R50 would be. And so if you have a wide angle lens and you just want to zoom in a little bit more on it but don't have a different lens with you, or even if you have a telephoto lens but you just want to get a little extra reach out of it and just zoom in a little bit more in the camera without having to do that in like a video editing software, if you enable movie cropping, it's going to crop in 1.6 times on your video. And so if you have a 100mm lens that you're recording video with, if you turn this on, it'll essentially turn it into a 160mm lens equivalent. And you can basically do that math on any lens you have. Whatever your focal length is times 1.6 is what this is pretty much going to turn it into. And with that enabled, you even have all the same different frame rate and resolution options. So it's really not that limiting. However, it does give you a little bit less sharp video and a little bit more noise and grain in your videos as well. But I do think if you have no other choice and you just really need to zoom in a little bit more, that is a great option to have. But 99% of the time, unless you specifically need it, I would keep it disabled. All right, next up, down to sound recording. So I keep this on manual, and I actually set this to whatever level I need at the moment. So if I have a microphone plugged in, I'll just, set it up in the situation I need. I'll test it, and I'll try to keep this, let's see, I'll try to set it as I'm explaining it. So I'll try to max out right between the 6 and the 0. So right now you can see there's a couple times it almost got to the 0, but most of the time it's right around the 6. That's where I personally like to keep my audio levels. And then of course in my editing software, I'll adjust it, a couple decibels each direction, to dial in exactly how I need to. Now, if you don't want to worry about this and you just want to pick up the camera and shoot video and get decent audio at least if you need it, and just not have to worry about it every single time and every time you switch locations and switch microphones and things like that, you can definitely just set this to auto and it's going to work very well for you. You really won't have to worry about it too much, but just to get the best quality and to make sure it's perfect, I usually just set this at manual and dial it in every time I need to. And then for the wind filter, I keep this on auto. Of course, it's a wind filter, so if you have windy noise and it's kind of going into your microphone, you have that wind noise, it'll try to disable it. So basically, if you're outside in really windy areas and you have a lot of wind going on, I would just turn this on auto or just keep it on that all the time. It'll basically just help to get rid of some of that wind noise and just make your audio sound a little bit better. And then next up, audio noise reduction. I actually disable this. However, that's because I add noise reduction in my editing software. Again, if you just want decent audio straight out of the camera that you don't want to worry about, you just want it to sound as good as possible without doing anything to it, I would enable this. I wouldn't set it to high, but I would just set this to enable. Just any noise in the background, the camera will do its best to get rid of this just in the camera, so you don't have to worry about that at all. So if you have like an air conditioner running in the background, just simple things like that aren't super loud, this will help get rid of that just a little bit. And so that's it for the sound recording options. Next up, let's go over to page 2, and then for ISO speed settings. This right here, your ISO, I would recommend keeping as low as possible. Basically, the higher your ISO is, the more noise and grain in your videos, and basically just the worse the look. So I keep this as low as possible. However, in the video recording mode, which I'll get to in just a minute, 800 is actually as low as you want to keep it. You can go lower, but basically you just want to keep your ISO as low as possible, or if you're shooting in C-Log 3, I would try to keep it just steady at 800 if you can. But I do feel comfortable pushing it up to 1600, even 3200 if I need to. Again, just the higher you go above 800, there will just be more noise and grain in your videos, and essentially they'll just look a little bit worse. All right, next up, a lot of these are grayed out, so you don't really need to worry about those right now. We're gonna go over to page 3, AV 8th stop increment. I just keep that disabled. Go over to page 4. White balance, this is kind of specific to whatever location and lighting you have. I honestly do keep this at daylight for 90% of the time. Then if I need to do small adjustments, I will, but most of the time I just use daylight lights as it is or record outside. But the important thing on this page is this right here, Canon log settings. So to get the highest quality, best looking video out of this camera, you want to record in C-Log3. So in Canon Log, go ahead and set that right there to C-Log3. View Assist, you want to keep that on. Characteristics, actually keep those at 0, 0, 0. And then lastly, color space, set that to Cinema Gamut. And so if you don't know what C-Log is, it's essentially a color mode that you're going to record in, and it essentially gives you a ton more dynamic range, more accurate, and just better looking colors on your video versus, not using this and just using the standard video out of the camera. Now, the only thing with this is you're going to have to know how to color correct and color grade in your editing software, or at least apply a LUT to your footage. I'm not going to get into that in this video. There's a ton of tutorials out there if you want to look into that and learn more about C-Log3 and using LUTs. But I really would 100% recommend using this. It gives you such better quality, higher dynamic range, just better looking video than, not using C-Log3 in the Canon R8. I mean, it really just levels up the video quality out of this camera, so I would 100% recommend that. And these are personally the settings I use for C-Log3. And then besides that, a lot of these other things aren't specifically to do with the video quality, but they're a lot more personal preference or situation-based settings. But I'll just run through a couple of these real quick. I keep all of my, aberration corrections, focus breathing correction. I keep all that stuff on this camera. Of course, just to get the best quality straight out of the camera that I can. High-speed ISO noise reduction, I just set that as standard. Over to page 6, there is actually a pre-recording mode for video, so, if you hit record like a second too late, you can actually set it to record 3 or 5 seconds, before you press the start record button, which is kind of crazy, it's kind of cool. There are a couple limitations, but if you need something like that, that option is there. And then same thing with self-timer, if you need a self-timer for video, they got it in this camera. Image stabilizer mode, I keep video image stabilization on. I usually don't do enhanced because that makes it a little weird and distorted sometimes, but I always keep digital image stabilization on for video just to get slightly smoother video since this camera does not have IBIS. And then down here, shutter button function for movies. I set this so fully pressing it starts and stop movie recording. I think normally this camera doesn't have that set. I like to just use the shutter button to start and stop recording videos. And then, if I need to take a photo, I'll just switch over to the photo mode. But I just like to use that shutter button rather than this video button up here. It's a lot smaller, just harder to get to than just the standard shutter button. Again, this is a lot more just personal preference. But besides that, that's really all the main video quality modes that have to do with, just getting the best quality video out of the Canon R8. I hope this video helped you out. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video.